It didn't take long for me to take a liking to Age of Wonders Planetfall. From its 6 over-the-top sci-fi factions spewing lasers, acid bile, and personality all over the randomly generated planets, to the way it manages to finally balance its pacing between a traditional 4X campaign and XCOM-style tactical battles, there is plenty to praise. A little more sense of tech progression and deeper base building wouldn't have hurt, though. The far future setting has layers of complexity without feeling overly complicated. Hundreds of years ago, the galaxy-spanning Star Union collapsed, and each of the interesting and distinct factions of Planetfall represents some splinter group of survivors that went their own way in the aftermath. The Vanguard are standard-issue humans who have been in cryosleep since before the collapse, and they offer a great starting point with their familiar style of conventional warfare. But if you want to get weird, there are plenty of intriguing alternatives, like the melee-focused insectoid Kirko and the creepy-as-hell cybernetic Assembly. You can get to know each of these factions through a handful of well-written, quest-driven story scenarios set on pre-made maps that help flesh out their place in the galaxy. The one downside is that once I looked beyond these handcrafted scenarios, the random maps that make up the meat of Planetfall felt a little bit lacking in comparison. There are always a variety of victory conditions to pursue, but without those meaningful storylines steering me toward them, I just wasn't as excited to get there. On the bright side, getting to the end has a great flow, whether you're on story or random maps. Developer Triumph Studios has triumphed in striking a tricky pacing balance, with battles usually lasting around 3 to 5 turns. This is long enough to build some excitement and allow for fun and tactical decision-making, but quick enough that each campaign turn doesn't get bogged down with several XCOM missions worth of combat. And the battles are a lot of fun too, especially considering how different and interesting each of the factions are once the plasma starts to fly. The Vanguard feel like a pretty typical XCOM squad, relying on firing lines and overlapping fields of Overwatch to gain ranged superiority. The Kirko couldn't be further from that, dishing out high melee damage and hive mind abilities that encourage you to attack in clusters. I loved how each army forced me to change my thinking and develop new doctrines. While the unit variety available through the tech tree is strong, not even factoring in the wild and wonderful neutral units that you can recruit on each map to change things up further, I felt I was missing a sense of meaningful progression at times. It's true that almost every node of military research expands your toolbox, but it's mostly side grades for what you already have. Units can be upgraded with up to 3 offense, defense, and support modules, as well as gain experience over time, but a unit with 3 late-game mods doesn't do a lot more damage or take a lot more punishment than one with 3 early-game mods. They just have more roles available. Later-game elite units can pick up this slack somewhat, but even they often felt more like specialists than straight upgrades. I never got that powerful feeling of upgrading my spearmen to swordsmen in Civilization, or kitting out an XCOM squad with plasma weapons for the first time, and that takes some of the inherent excitement out of progressing down the tech tree. The things I typically found myself doing on the campaign map weren't as interesting as the things I was doing in battle either. Base building is fairly straightforward, with a few decisions to make about how to specialize different sectors that come under your control. It gives me the impression of something I need to do in the background to support my armies, rather than an interesting challenge in itself. Even when playing on the experienced difficulty, I never had enough issues with unrest to actually have to deal with riots, whether or not I was paying a lot of attention to my colony's happiness. While they may sometimes be dull to play on, Planetfall's randomized maps are never dull to look at. Each world type, from feral wilderness to ruined urban sprawl, creates a strong sense of place with clever use of color and environmental detail. Every faction pops with interplanetary pizzazz. Planetfall even takes a concept as generic as a futuristic space rifleman and gives it enough flair to seem handcrafted and interesting. All the while, the musical score does a fine job setting the mood of danger, exploration, and striving onward in the face of decay. Age of Wonders Planetfall is a dazzling, slick, diverse 4X with snappy and exciting turn-based combat, and a story I was always eager to discover more of. My biggest concern is that when I finish the last couple faction stories, I'll feel like I'm done with it altogether. The randomized maps haven't convinced me that they have enough going on to keep me coming back for hundreds more turns yet. But even if that's the case, it's an experience I can already recommend highly. I guess you could say I've Planetfallen for it. For more tactical action, check out our reviews of Fire Emblem Three Houses and Steel Division 2. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.
Enemy terminated.